The time has come for the Cobra to rise up and reveal himself.
Now let's take a look at how the Federal Reserve keeps track of the money in circulation. And the Federal Reserve, because money can be stored in different forms, the Federal Reserve has to break the storage of that money down and the unit of account of that money down into two different formulas, or two different categories, based on the liquidity of each category. And liquidity means the ability to turn assets into cash. And as one of our course's heroes, Gordon Gekko, says, it's about being really liquid. I'm talking liquid, $150 million a year, a player, or nothing. That's your goal. All right, to be totally liquid, money at your disposal. So the Federal Reserve breaks those second and third, the unit of account and where money is stored. The Federal Reserve is in charge of the money supply. We're going to take a look at how the Federal Reserve can adjust the money supply, pull money out of circulation or push money into circulation to adjust the economy from recession or inflation. And so the Federal Reserve has to keep track of all of the money and how that money is stored. And it breaks it down in two ways. M1, which is the most liquid, and go back to our definition, it is either cash itself or can quickly be turned into cash, versus M2, which is harder to turn into cash. So M1 is either cash or coin, it is immediately cash, or checking accounts, which are also known as demand deposits, because with a checking account, you could write a check against it and it becomes cash, or you could use your debit card, take it to an ATM, punch in your code, you win every time, and it immediately becomes cash. So that's why a checking account is more commonly referred to as, or also commonly referred to as, a demand account, because you can easily demand your money. You can write a check against your checking account, turn it directly into cash, or use your debit card and directly access your checking account. When you use your debit card, you are turning that money directly into cash. You're withdrawing money from your account, and now it becomes cash. Or traveler's checks, which are, when you have a checking account, if you are traveling, you can take a portion of that money and turn it into a traveler's check, and what that check says is that this check must be given to another bank in order, and signed by you, to be, with proof of identification obviously, to be then turned into cash. It is a way to protect yourself when you travel to foreign countries. You just go to a savings and loan bank, and then you can turn that money directly into cash. It's a way to protect yourself. Instead of traveling with a whole bunch of cash, you can travel with a few different traveler's checks in like whatever amounts, and should you hopefully not lose it or something like that, you can then call your bank and have them cancel the traveler's checks to preserve your money. So it's a safe way to carry your money, especially to foreign countries. But the checking account is your most basic type of banking account. It's where you want the easiest demand, you're able to demand your money the quickest. So that's why checking is part of M1. M2, savings accounts, certificate of deposits, and money market accounts all take a second or third step to turn your money into cash. These do not come with debit cards, and to get money from your savings, you either have to specifically withdraw that money from your savings or first transfer it into your checking to then withdraw it. Money market, same thing. It's like more advanced savings accounts with a higher interest rate to discourage you taking that money out of it. And certificates of deposits are also known as timed accounts. in that you cannot touch this money for a certain amount of time. You literally sign a certificate of you depositing the money for X amount of time. And M2 takes an additional step to turn your asset into cash, so therefore it is less liquid. Here is the most confusing part of this lesson is the formula, because money you can turn M1 into M1. So if which is also always a trick question, you have to be careful. The test might ask you, well, what happens to M1 and M2? You can turn them into each other, and they'll change in their value. So if you turn, let's say you turn $20 cash you put that cash into your checking account, the formula for M1 is just M1. You can change M1 into its different forms, and the amount of M1 in circulation will not change. If you turn checking into cash, or cash into checking, or checking into a traveler's check, and a traveler's check into cash, whatever you're doing, it's still all M1, it's just changing forms. However, if you put your cash into a savings account, M1 has now decreased. That money is no longer liquid, but that money is now M2. Now here's the strange part of the formula. And there's kind of two ways to look at it. You know, it is M2. The main formula is M2 equals M1 plus M2, and it kind of has, so it's kind of weird. Like, isn't M2? It's itself plus M1. And another way to look at it is like, here's the M1 bubble. Here's what M1 is. Here's M2, but M2 also encompasses itself plus M1. So, but it also at the same time makes sense, because to get to M2, you have to originally have been M1. Money just doesn't appear in your savings account, as nice of a thought as that would be. You would first have to take cash and then bring it to the bank and put it into your savings account. So by having M2 equal M1 plus M2, it's recognizing that M2 is itself, but at some point, but that M1 is also part of the money supply, and the money supply, and at any point, M1 could become M2. So to keep track of it, M2, I know it's very silly, but M2 is itself plus M1. Now for the AP test, M1, if you turn cash into checking, let's say you turn, I think this was actually an AP question, let's say you deposit $5,000 cash into $5,000 checking. What is the change to M1? And the answer is there is no change, because it is still M1. However, if you took that $5,000 cash and put it into savings, M1 decreased, but M2 remained the same, because M2 is M1 plus itself. And so the reason the formula has to be like that, because it recognizes that M1 can become M2. All of this, though, is the function of the Federal Reserve. Again, it is a little confusing, but here are the two formulas. Just be careful. They appear as a trick question. But here is the money supply. The Federal Reserve is in charge of the money supply, and the Federal Reserve, through its member banks, can either increase or decrease the money supply to alter an economic situation. And we're going to take a look at how the Federal Reserve does that and when it should do it in our subsequent lessons. Until then, invest hard, invest often, and no feelings. And remember, money never sleeps. We'll see you next time.